thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Fresno Steering Committee meeting. We'll get going. Tonight we're going to cover a few welcome introductions and announcements, and then we're going to do a quick update on the exercises that we've been doing and the feedback that the Air District and CARB have been collecting on just different opinions and requests that the steering committee has given. Then Joseph, kindly over here, from CalSTART, is going to do a presentation on heavy-duty truck technologies. And then CARB is going to do a presentation on the SEP, which is a request that we got last time, and so why we're here. Just as a reminder, if you don't already have headsets, please grab one and help yourself to food anytime. And I know this seems redundant, but if anytime you need to go to the bathroom or take a break, please do. You do you and meet your needs. We're going to go to Naomi.
Hi, good evening, buenas noches. So that the interpreters don't feel bored, I'm going to do my intervention in Spanish. No, just kidding. No. No se emocionen, no voy a hablar español. No, well, welcome. We're a small group, but we're here and we love to hear your feedback, especially about what the district and CARB will share based on the feedback that we all gave last meeting. And very importantly, at the end of the meeting, we're going to really be asking you to give us suggestions. How do we want to put together the agendas for the next meetings? What items do we want to add to these agendas? And what would you like to be included in the discussion? But that's going to be at the end of the meeting.
Oh, I think I'm next. If my yes, I'm Jamie. I think you all know me. We just wanted to take a minute because we all became a little bit of cigarette smokers last night, and I wanted to explain why, except for maybe the CARB folks who weren't here. So there was a lot of smoke in Fresno last night, and folks were concerned, duly so. They should have been concerned. Our RAN system saw two huge jumps. Both the biggest ones were up in Clovis and in Fresno. There was a smaller one down in Visalia. We forecasted yesterday, technically it happened on Monday, but it was for yesterday, that we would have mixing come in and that we would have a little bit more atmospheric movement. So we thought it was going to be better. And we have spent a lot of time this morning talking about how we can do better to make those calls better. So, we got it wrong. And I want to apologize for that. We're going to come back in January and talk a whole bunch about outreach, about how we can actually be quicker in how we communicate this stuff. Make sure that when we do have these little kind of baby spikes, these spikes that go up and down relatively quickly. It was about 4 hours that it was spiked. But that the public is aware of it. We did and have continued to do a lot of talking with the media, but I just wanted you guys to know that it didn't go unnoticed, and we are working very hard. I appreciate Naimeen reached out to me, and we were actually talking about it most of the morning in a big meeting. So we want to look to you all to give us that feedback and to say, hey, what happened, what was going on. It was pretty obvious to anyone who went outside last night, and we got calls from people who actually, it really impacted their health. So the rule has gotten stricter. It means there's less burn days, and days like yesterday, we want to avoid as much as possible. Forecasting is not a perfect science. That's why sometimes when folks say it's going to rain, it doesn't rain, but we are always trying to do better, and we will continue to do that. So in January, Naimeen suggested, and I think it's a good idea if you guys are on board with it, we're going to at least spend a little bit of the time talking about outreach, some of our wintertime outreach, some of the outreach about the grant programs, especially the ones that are going on right now that we're really trying to get this community to take advantage of. So that's coming up, but thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. And but also in terms of the outreach, please start thinking of ideas. Like I am a little bit sad that our Spanish speakers are not here, because oftentimes they are the ones who hear the least of these type of things. The outlet that was able to make this public yesterday is an English local station, but That's not the type of media that a lot of our Spanish speakers listen or look into. So we hope that all of you come up with some ideas in January of how can we all work together to get the word out fast as possible when we have these peaks on PM 2.5. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to, okay, sorry.
Okay, first, oh, that's loud. First off, January's, a really good time to discuss it, but it's also dead in the middle of winter, and we're going to be having more days like we had yesterday. Is there any way that the Air District can implement a media plan? Because I personally would like to see something going beneath, like the read on the television set, what they do with fog, or on the radio going, during this period of time, air quality is really bad, so, making it more out there for people to actually have to start to face how bad the particulate matter is in Fresno.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. We would love to have the ticker that runs under the news broadcast. What we have heard, and mind you, we haven't asked them in a couple years, but I think we should go back and ask them again, is that those tickers are mandated usually by their corporate office as to what they will allow to run on the bottom of the tickers. And because the types of air quality challenges that we have in the valley are not the types of air quality challenges that they have outside of the valley, we have been told that their corporate office won't let them put air quality, real-time data on the bottom of the newscast. I do think it's time to revisit that. I think we continue to push because that was several years ago that they told us no, and I don't know why they can't tell us no again. Yes. Yeah.
Great. Those are awesome questions, Lisa.
Cass, will you make sure that I do that? I'm just going to tell my staff to do that.
Don't worry, we will hold it.
I want to do it before the meeting.
All right. Oh, that was really loud. I was not going to hold it quite as close to my mouth. So what we wanted to do in this next agenda item is follow up on the discussion that happened at the last steering committee. And I think almost all of you were actually there as well, where we broke up into table groups and really had a chance to have a deeper dive into the mobile source strategies that are included in the plan so that you all could ask questions and particularly identify things that you wanted further follow up on and, how is implementation actually going to work? So we took extensive notes on flip charts at each table and those photographs of those notes have been posted both on our website at CARB and the Air District's website for this community. So that's a resource to go back and look at in terms of remembering what all of those items are. But of course, the key thing is now, what's the next step and what are the follow-up and action items for all of those? So I wanted to start that discussion tonight by going through a number of things that we've been thinking of are the appropriate next steps, but really have a discussion with you all to say, did we capture everything? We're also suggesting an order to walk through things, but if you'd like to change that order around because you have some higher priority ones that you'd like to talk about, that's the kind of thing that we think would be good to have a conversation on tonight as well. Just one slide. So when we went back and looked at what was in all of those flip charts and listening to the conversations, there were some sort of fairly clear buckets of things that grouped together, and a number of them were related to enforcement of our mobile source regulations, and especially how to get the community involved in that, and how do we report back to all of you about what we're seeing and what the follow-up actions are. So you all should have a one-pager that says CARB Enforcement Division Next Steps. And this lays out essentially a schedule for different topics that we propose to bring back to the committee to follow up on these different aspects. One of which, as you just heard, will be a discussion on the supplemental environmental projects tonight. But there were a number of other things that sort of grouped together. One would be, and these are all actually commitments that were in the enforcement plan that's in the emission reduction program, and that is to sit down and talk about how the complaint process works, how community members can more effectively report complaints to CARB in the district so that we really can follow up as part of that. And there was a lot of discussion, especially about how our idling restrictions work. And so being able to talk more about when and where trucks can or cannot idle, because that also feeds into how to file an effective complaint. And so we were thinking that could be in the first quarter of 2020. And then the thought was to come back in the second quarter and talk a little bit about some of the targeted enforcement efforts that Warren's team is already started on based on feedback and discussion that we've heard from all of you, but also to potentially do a mapping exercise to look at, are there other areas where you are seeing problems that you think we should report back on? And then the goal would be that we would continue to repeat this process going forward so that as we find things, we can report back to this group about what we're finding and then continue to get discussion with you about what would be the next steps that we would want to follow up on. A couple other things I also just wanted to mention on the aspects of enforcement would be that several people brought up that when you call our complaint line, it's all in English, and that's not very helpful when there are areas with a lot of Spanish speakers. So we've taken that back, and we are already working on getting a complaint line where you can report in Spanish as well. The other thing that came up was interest on the anti-no idling signs. Could there be a possibility of actually putting the complaint number, the hotline that you call on the sign, so it's one place to see? There are some restrictions in some places on where we can do that, but Warren's team is actually looking at, are there some alternative signs that we can put together, maybe especially around schools, that would allow us to be able to do that, so we can continue to report back on that progress overall. One of the other big topic areas was more information about the different kinds of technologies that are available for different mobile sources, and I think particularly heavy-duty trucks. For example, as you're all thinking about where to make investments in incentive funds, what are the relative benefits and availability of different kinds of technology and fuel options? So you have a second handout that says technology options for reducing emissions from heavy-duty vehicles that kind of lays out the same thoughts about a schedule for coming back to the committee with additional information. Starting with, hopefully by the end of this month, just putting together some links and readily available summaries that we have right now. And then the presentation you're going to hear from CalSTART is also a good kickoff point for that as well. But we've also been working on a technology clearinghouse and different tools that people can go to be able to collect this information. So what we're proposing is to come back in the first quarter of next year and start talking about what those tools look like, and maybe either the whole group or a small working group on working with us on what kinds of information would you like to see, and especially because we know we are not always good at this, how is it accessible and usable information to the steering committee and community members. And then come back following that, being able to do a demonstration of what that tool actually looks like. And then there were also a lot of discussion about some of our upcoming rulemaking and things like that. And for anybody who maybe doesn't know, we're having a 2-day board meeting tomorrow and Friday. And one of the biggest items that's going to be considered tomorrow is what's known as our Advanced Clean Truck Regulation. And this is starting to outline how we transition the heavy-duty truck fleet to zero-emission technologies. So we know we're hearing a big push from many to have our board go more stringent than what our staff proposal is, so it's always good for them to hear from all of you the needs, but we can also continue to report back to this group what that board discussion is and what the next steps are. There was also a lot of interest in a handbook that we're preparing, we're calling the Freight Handbook, which is going to provide guidance on when new warehouses are being sited, what are best practices for doing that, how can community members engage in the process, and we are looking to get a concept paper for that out by the end of the year. So be alert for that, and we'll certainly let you know when that comes out. As I'd already mentioned, supplemental environmental projects, how they work, how we could get that violation funding invested back in this community was a big topic. So Natalie's going to give a presentation on that tonight, and I think also talk a little bit about some of the groups here who've already been participating in that process. And then we know there are, continue to be other items, and so our goal is to continue to follow up on those as well. So with that, Naimeen, anything that you recall from last time, or others on the committee that?
No, I think that was a great summary, Karen. My only question would be the Fright Handbook that you referred to. Is that going to include like recommendations of best practices, or is it like this is how you are supposed to do it?
I have not seen the actual text, but I believe it is essentially best practices. So, it might be design and siting considerations to minimize exposure. It might be, here are the cleanest technologies that you should be considering as part of the process of siting these new facilities. The goal is that the Freight Handbook will start with warehouses, but we will add additional types of freight facilities over time, such as ports and rail yards. But we know warehouses is one that's of some of the highest concern right now.
Any other questions for Karen before we move on? All right, Jessica.
Thank you. So, sort of in the exact same vein that Karen just summarized, we also wanted to go through a little bit deeper of a next steps process for the prioritization, the like it, love it exercise we did a couple of meetings ago. And last time we handed out the full page and the full list of everything that we did, the like it, love it, sort of the prioritization, what that sort of came out to. But instead of going through that entire list, we wanted to do something similar, and we'd worked with CARB on seeing how can we start addressing these. And to a lot of the points that everyone keeps bringing up, we 100% agree, we need to start finding out what our implementation of these are going to look like. And so we thought the best way to start that is to start with the top of those sort of measures that you identified as like the ones that we could, as a district, start implementing very, very soon, and that's kind of how we presented them to you, and then you told us what you thought were kind of sort of the most supported, or the strategies you wanted to get done sooner or quicker. So that's what this table is, and this is the table in your handout. And again, if you don't have this table, it should be in your little packet. Raise your hand and we'll do what we've just been doing, passing it around. But this table highlights 8, so those are the top 8 measures that we did in that prioritization exercise. And what we did here is we want to come back in the next several meetings with a few, maybe 2 or 3, depending on time. Obviously, we're going to have some outreach discussions. We're going to have some mobile source discussions we just heard about. But we also want to fit in some of these implementation discussions of these measures. And a lot of this is stuff we're going to need your feedback on. So what I want to do in the next 5 minutes is just kind of start the quick discussion, but in reality, it's sort of like in the next several weeks, you're going to give us a lot of feedback. Who should we be bringing to these? We've listed a couple of partners for these different measures that we can, people we want to hear from you, the community, who we can bring to these meetings to help set up some implementation plan. And what I mean by that is, one example is the very first one. It was really the most supported of all of the strategies, and it was urban greening. And we, of course, think a related measure not only is the ability to find opportunities for increased urban greening, but then find increased outreach and how we can sort of support and solicit more funding or more support for urban greening. But we felt like, okay, well, we know of Tree Fresno, but there are a lot of folks out here that are involved in things that are, sort of bigger than just the air quality stuff that we're involved in. So you guys might know someone outside of Tree Fresno, or you might know one particular contact you think is great. That's what we want to hear your feedback on. Who should we bring to these meetings? And that way, as we start to develop the agendas, we want you guys to help us develop these agendas. Help us figure out what these topics are going to be and how we're going to implement them, how we're going to come up with a strategy that you guys can all look at and feel comfortable that we're implementing these strategies the way that we envisioned as we wrote the CERP together. So if you have ideas right now, and just going down the list, the next one is provide enhanced incentives to replace wood-burning devices. That could be something, maybe there's retailers, we work with retailers often for these sorts of things, but maybe there's someone out there that you know, or a type of outreach strategy that we can discuss in January that focuses on residential wood burning outreach. We talked about mitigating exposure to air pollution through weatherization. So we, at the district, have already reached out to Fresno EOC and PG&E, but maybe, again, there are other partners you can think of or other things that you want to do to help have that discussion. And then I don't want to insult your intelligence. You guys can read down the list. But if there's anything on this list in the next several minutes that you have ideas on, or throughout this meeting, or really in the next few weeks as we start to develop the agenda for the new year, let us know. And then kind of let us know, and maybe in the next few minutes, maybe the main suggestion we can see is, what sorts of meetings do you like? Do you want this to be, we'll bring in people and we'll give you presentations on different options? Do you want it to be exercise-based, where we go around the room and sort of do different exercises, mapping exercises? So I think in reality, we just want to hear from you what you want these implementation meetings to look like, who you want at these meetings, and how you want to proceed forward. Yes.
Well, it's a question and a comment. So it's not giving ideas or specific feedback about these particular strategies, but I recall really clearly, especially in the Spanish table where I was sitting, that for community members, when they did the exercise of looking at the different mobile sources strategies, for example, there was the desire of reducing the amount that was recommended for locomotives, for example, and add more for school buses. That was just one that really stood in my mind, in my memory. The other one was the same thing as looking here at the tune in, tune up. They were like, that's already happening. Why we're like needing more money? Why should we spend the money in that particular strategy? So I think my question is, for those recommendations that were made last meeting, specifically about, cut money here, put it more there, or, we don't even need that strategy. Is there also going to be that exercise done? Are we going to see a revised version of that?
Yes, and that's actually a great point. There are several things that we talked about last time that were things that maybe were closer to under the district's jurisdiction, or maybe joint district and CARB. So Karen mentioned a bunch of the stuff that CARB is going to do. There are also things within that we want to continue to address. And that, I 100% agree, and I think that's a really, really great point. There is incentives for school buses, and that could be part of that discussion. So maybe that's something that we can say, and maybe we can just talk right now. If that's something that's a really big priority to continue that discussion about moving funding from one to another, maybe we make incentives for school buses, including bringing more information about locomotives, because that was some of the concern too. Part of our, maybe that's the next one that we have discussion about.
And some of this, I think, maybe just once we get a little more information about some of these things, some of the moving money around, we can see a little broader too, because we've done a little bit, we've talked to IQ Air, which I think you may be familiar with, and it's basically an organization that's been working down in South Coast on school filtration systems. And if you recall, the CERP commits to putting school filtration in all of the schools within the boundary. But what we're finding is there may not be enough money in that pot. So some of that locomotive money may need to be pulled over here. So, we want to have a sense of urgency about doing this stuff, but we also want to make sure that as we're implementing, we're getting everyone's input so that we are putting the money where folks truly want it to go.
And thank you for that update. I think that what it will be helpful, at least from my personal perspective, is that we at least see and hear from the district. We hear you. We're going to, scratch that. The number of locomotives is not going to be 8 or whatever it was. It's going to be 2. Even if we just put the remaining money for now, like in a, like bike rack,
Yeah.
pending to see where else do we need it. But that at least that our recommendations or suggestions that we have been made in terms of, fine tuning the strategies are making it are being considered moving
Yes.
forward.
Yeah, great point, yeah.
I don't really know if this is a question for Karen or you, Jessica. I know we're trying to do parallel actions of getting implementation so we're not like behind the 8 ball and moving forward. But at the same time, we're working on a plan that isn't adopted yet. And so working on implementation is great. But at the same time, are we where we need to be for this to be approved and adopted by CARB? And are we meeting those standards that are required by the blueprint? So one of the things that we've asked and talked about in the beginning is, are we or have we reached those quantifiable targets? And those are basically just big words for saying the amount that we're putting to each of these measures, is it going to meet the goal of reducing that emission, right? So if that's not in there yet, how are we as a committee supposed to decide the priority of these measures if we don't know yet the emission reduction that's going to take place? And so the other part of that is, I don't want to get so stuck on implementing something that's not even yet approved when we still need to make sure that the plan is approved. And so everything, these activities that we're working on tonight, are these going to be changes that are actually seen in the final SERP that CARB is going to see? Or is it only that SERP that was approved by the district board that CARB is reviewing?
So none of these implementation strategies that we're putting together, and just to be clear, by the time, so what we're doing today is we're getting feedback on getting like these next few meetings. And so in reality, Jamie and Karen, to be honest, a lot of the stuff they brought up that will be at the January meeting might take up most of the January meeting. So a lot of these will probably be after that adoption anyhow. So moving forward, these won't be changes so much as the details and the implementation of what is in the SERP, which, as to your point, is the way it is right now is what is going to CARB's board. There won't be all of these implementation things, all of the talking about, moving money here or there, or bringing different partners to the table for different strategies aren't going to change the strategies themselves. And that's why the strategies are written the way they are, so we can have these implementation discussions and come up with all of these together as a committee. So.
Just to build upon.
Sorry, I didn't give Karen a chance. Do you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, that's my bad.
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, I mean, we are seeing in each of the emission reduction programs across the communities that there are quantified emission reductions in all of them. But it also is somewhat common across all of them that there are still ones that are yet to be quantified because there's more work to be done, whether it's developing a regulation and as part of that process, you have a better understanding of how to quantify the emissions. So I think those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at, as part of discussion and direction from our board, is continue to work on that additional quantification. And I think it sounds like from what Jessica was saying that things like moving money around it's part of implementation, but that also does reflect back into those emission reductions. And so maybe a good discussion is, how does that get documented so that we know that that was what the group decided as part of this process?
As we talk to people and learn more, much to Jamie's point, we're finding out that some of the estimates that we made on getting a lot of these priorities or these strategies implemented aren't going to cut it. So it's almost a necessity that we move some of that funding around as we delve deeper and talk to these people. So that is definitely, and that can happen. That'll be part of the process.
No, go ahead.
Just to build upon what Ivanka's talking about, there are 10 communities that are doing this right now. South Coast has put a big, from my reading, South Coast has a big read on, or has a big emphasis on locomotives and using that money to reduce their emissions issues. And in the big picture, I just wonder if we can have access to what other districts are doing and why they're doing them so that we get an idea of what kind of emissions reductions are available.
That's a great idea. And I was just now thinking, even to Naimeen's point, something that we're going to do, because I think just to give everyone, sort of arm them with as much information as possible, we can do that. And we can come back with a much better understanding of the realities of the locomotives that operate within the boundary. That way you guys can there have been sort of questions about that. I think a lot of folks are wondering, okay, well, how often is it truly here? Are we truly getting the reductions we need here? Because that's a bigger piece of the picture too. So we can come back with all of that information. I think that'll be necessary.
Just to piggyback on that, I think one of the things that we're going to be looking to the committee to help us navigate is there are some of these things that do have a huge emission reduction, but that emission reduction may not be felt as heavily in this community as school filters. So school filters aren't actually reducing emissions, but there's a huge value, to school filtration, at least some of us think there is in this community. So balancing that need to get the kind of biggest bang for your buck, which is really how our grant programs run in the past, with what does this community actually think is going to improve the health of the people living in this community. We want to make sure that we're not making that decision, that we're listening to you guys to make that decision.
Hi. You talk about implementation, you talk about coming back and getting our feedback. It would be really, really, really good and nice and kind of get the progress going is if the Air District would come up with some skeletons of how this is going to be implemented so we could fine tune it and really hit the ground running. I look at this and I think, oh, trees, outreach. How come Fresno State ag planning and marketing programs aren't listed?
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So I hope good thing we're recording this, because that's precisely, yeah.
When you talk about hosting a tune-in, tune-up event, do it at the first of the month when people have the money to sit there in their cars with at least a half a tank of gas to get through the process. I mean, there's some, very basic, out-of-the-box thinking, and I'm thinking, how come the Air District folks, staff, haven't done any sort of preliminary implementation outline for us by now?
Certainly. So I think a lot of that detail is in the SERP. If you think of every single one of these measures, it takes up anywhere from 2 to, 10, maybe multiple 5 to 6 pages that have the details of how we envision so then I'm really sure, but maybe, as we move forward, but I actually I think a skeleton or some sort of template for implementation we can certainly put out there, but I think all of those details, at least so far as we developed with the community over the past year, are in that SERP, and that's why that document's so thick. A lot of it are the details per measure. So maybe what we can do too moving forward is each of these, as we go through and talk about them, we'll print out that portion of the SERP and talk about it, because that's all where all the details are.
I hate to even throw it out because I know some of you already have it, but would it help to get a little binder for everybody, and then you can have little tabs that, these are the urban greening ones, and these are the land use ones, and these are the heavy duty ones, and then it's almost like every time we discuss certain things and they fall into enforcement, like the presentation that Karen's giving tonight, that can be stuck in there. I don't know. So that's just an idea. Any tools that we can give you that might be more easily consumable than a big fact document, we're willing to do.
Okay, I want to just underscore that this is definitely a topic today, but will be a topic in January as well as we continue to do that and flesh this out. Those suggestions that people have started to make are incredibly helpful, clearly. If you can turn your table in once it has notes to me or anybody up here, that would be fantastic. I'm going to move us forward though. So we are going to have Joseph give a presentation about heavy-duty truck technologies. All right, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I shouldn't have even sat down. Okay, great. Pardon my voice. I caught a little bug last Thursday, and it kind of invaded my throat. And so I'm not contagious, but, I am a little hoarse. So I'm going to be talking tonight about a subject that everybody in the Valley, I think, is really interested in, cleaner trucking, because it's certainly a big issue here. Just to kind of give you a heads up on who I am the director for CalStart's office here in the San Joaquin Valley. CalStart's been around for about 27 years. It's a 501c3 nonprofit that is focused on cleaner transportation technology and advocating for that and working on policy and on project implementation. And we're actually working with the San Joaquin Valley Air District on a number of projects here in the valley to deploy advanced cleaner transportation technology and specifically trucks. And we'll go over a few of those tonight.
What did you do before that, Joseph?
Oh my gosh, before that. Well, let's see. I was the City of Fresno Sustainability Manager for 5 years. I ran the operation I helped run the operation for converting the City of Fresno's refuse truck and transit fleet over to alt fuels. And before that, I worked for Detroit Diesel Corporation for about 2 years as their alt fuel product support rep in the western region. And before that, I worked for Clovis Unified for about 20 years with alt fuel vehicles.
And I'm just bringing it up because if you don't know Joseph was talking green before anyone else was talking green, at least definitely the people in my world, and was pushing electric vehicles and some of the alternative fuel stuff back before we knew that Tesla was more than, just a man back in history. So he's got a little bit of street cred.
Yeah, a little bit of street cred. I've been in this for a while. In fact, when I just ran down all those years of my work experience, I'm like, dang, I'm old. Anyway, so what we're going to do, let's see if I can get this to work right. Okay. First of all, I think everybody in the room probably recognizes that trucks today are a lot cleaner than they used to be. Okay, I remember, in fact, had lunch yesterday with Pat Smith at Harris Farms, which was one of the early adopters of alternate fuel advanced clean trucking a number of years ago, and they've just recently added 28 advanced ultra-low NOx clean natural gas trucks to their fleet. Anyway, he and I were laughing about the fact that back in the day in the 90s, we thought a 4-gram engine was really clean. And then when they came out with a 2-gram engine, we thought that was the end-all, be-all. And of course, today the standard is 0.2 gram. And so this little slide that I have up here, that truck on the left is a 90s vintage Freightliner that probably had about a 4-gram engine in it. And that truck that's on the right there is a 2010 compliant truck with a 0.2 gram engine. So we've come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go. I see them occasionally, but very few. Most of them are gone. And the Air District's incentive program has helped get rid of most of them.
Sometimes they're used for short distance in the fields, like to transport things from the fields to packing houses?
There's still some older ag trucks out there. And some of them are, I see a few that are probably 90s vintage. But again, they're pretty rare. And they're getting rarer every year. So I think we're all moving in the right direction. There are, however, I said the current standard is 0.2 gram NOx. And this truck here is a Freightliner that is actually operating in Southern California. It's got a ultra-low NOx natural gas engine in it that is operating at 0.02. It's 90% cleaner than even the current standard. And these truck engines are available today. They're available, and we're starting to see truck fleets, like as I mentioned, Harris Farms has 28 of these new units. We've got a lot of other trucking fleets in the valley now that are considering natural gas, both in liquid form and in compressed form. So it is definitely a technology. It's been around a long time. When I started working on clean technology in the 1990s, natural gas engines were just starting to be deployed in transit buses. And so that technology is pretty well proven, and it's been out there now for a long enough time that there's quite a confidence in it among the trucking industry. And certainly our transit fleets, almost exclusively in the valley, are natural gas. Well, on this setup, it's the cost differential on the engine is about $40,000. But when you start, the other cost factor that you have here is the fuel tanks. So you have to add a lot more fuel tanks if you want to get more range. Natural gas doesn't have as much energy per gallon equivalent as diesel fuel. So it takes more tankage in order to achieve the same amount of range. So if a trucker, this truck here actually has a range of about 800 miles. And it has tanks that are arranged behind the cab and down along the frame rails. Excuse me. And, but, you know, and so then that tankage adds weight. And fortunately, in California, about a year ago, we got some legislation passed now that gives trucks with alt-fuel engines or advanced technology a 2,000-pound weight variance. So it allows these truckers basically to haul the same amount of payload with a slightly heavier tractor. And that was a really good thing, because if they can't haul the payload, as much payload per truck, then they're going to add more trucks. So the more trucks we have, the more of our problem. There's also clean fuel options available. And I was looking through the booklet that's on the table tonight, and I noticed that, you know, you had identified renewable diesel fuel, renewable natural gas, biodiesel as, you know, options to be considered. And those certainly are valid. Again, renewable natural gas, when you use it in a ultra-low NOx certified engine, it will have a 90% reduction in NOx emissions over the current standard, which is, I mean, it's almost. And if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, if you use the renewable natural gas comes from dairies, from dairy digesters, and we certainly have a lot of those here in the valley, the carbon emissions are actually negative. This technology actually literally, no, it is negative. It's a negative carbon emission.
Doesn't that very much depend on what the cows are eating? I mean,
well, the cows eat a pretty consistent food supply.
Yeah, fertilized with what? And what's the source of the fertilizer?
You know, sir, I'm not going to argue with you. CARB has figured out it's a negative
Well,
carbon intensity.
I know that's what they figured, but.
All right, we're going to go on. So renewable diesel fuel is also available. It's about a 30% PM reduction and about a 10% NOx reduction. And then biodiesel has been around for quite a while. It's about a 50% PM reduction. But unfortunately, typically you get a NOx increase with biodiesel. So that has to be blended properly or you don't end up with a good result there. Electric is coming, but it's not really here yet. And even though we have, I mean, when I say it's not really here yet, it's here, but it's not widely available, and it's not quite ready for prime time in our observations. So we have a number of projects that we're doing here in the valley. There's a number of electric yard trucks that are out there being demonstrated right now. We have the pickup and delivery projects going with the U.S. Postal Service and Ameripride, but in multiple locations here in the valley. And then Tesla has started doing some demonstration work with their prototype over-the-road Class 8 truck. And we have a project with Frito-Lay and PepsiCo in Modesto that's actually going to be deploying 15 of those, probably in, well, if Tesla meets their commitment, they'll be deployed in about a year and a half. We'll see. Well, the latest they're saying is about 18 months. So we'll see. You know, this is very difficult. It's very difficult to take the technology that we have today with batteries and with the motors are very sound, but it's the battery technology and then integrating it and then developing the charging infrastructure, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute.
And I was just wondering about the range.
Yeah, and the range is an issue. That's a huge issue. So with a yard tractor, it's not so big of a deal because the thing doesn't really leave the facility. It's just running around at the warehouse. But the problem with yard tractors is it takes time to charge them. and most yard tractors are pretty much running almost 24 hours a day. There's very little downtime with the yard tractor. So those demonstrations have had some challenges. And then,
Joseph, a quick question. What
Yeah.
is the power requirement for charging a Class 8 Tesla truck on a quick charge? Do you know?
Tesla wouldn't tell us. Tesla would not tell us. They're keeping a lot of this with that truck very secret. And I actually saw that demonstrator at the Frito-Lay plant in Modesto a month or so ago, and I asked the Tesla rep, some very specific questions, and he wouldn't answer me. So, you know, that's kind of the way it goes. But those pickup and delivery trucks, those require about 40, actually no, those require anywhere from 40 to 100 kW for each one of them. And we're going to get into that in just a second, because when you start deploying large numbers of electric vehicles at a site, now you start creating a problem taxing the electric grid and its ability to support that facility. Same thing with yard tractors. They need about, you know, anywhere from 40 kW up, depending on the speed that they need to charge. And then, of course, the faster you charge a battery pack, the shorter the life of that pack. So some of these units are at the stage where they're trying to figure out what the battery life really is going to be on them, and then, of course, figure out what the cost of replacement of those batteries is going to look like. So this is a slide that CalSTART has put together, kind of showing what we believe to be how the rollout of electric propulsion is going to occur in the over-the-road trucking. Right now, we have, today, you can buy zero-emission electric transit buses, and you can buy zero-emission electric industrial forklifts and a few other commodities. And right now, we're working with most all of our transit agencies in the San Joaquin Valley to implement electric transit buses as part of the new CARB regulation that they have to convert all of their fleets over to zero emission by 2040. And then following with that, we're starting to see a wave of pickup and delivery electric vehicles. Change has sold about 1,000 of the units that you see there on the top, that FedEx, this unit here. Excuse me. And those haven't been delivered yet, but they're coming, and it'll be interesting to see how those perform. Followed by that, we're going to probably start seeing availability from Fuso and Freightliner, and then a year or two down the road, then we'll start seeing some availability from, you know, Freightliner and some other models with Volvo and some of the other Mack and some of the others in Tesla, and that will basically be the way that this technology we foresee will roll out. And eventually we may end up seeing trucks like this Nikola over here that has a fuel cell to add range. Because when you start talking about battery packs and adding range, the battery technology just doesn't have the storage capacity in it today to come anywhere near the energy storage for diesel fuel or even gasoline. And so it takes a lot of batteries, and that adds a lot of weight, and then that requires a lot more power to move all of that weight, and, you know, it's a diminishing return.
I'm sorry, is it a Nikola hydrogen over electric?
It is. It's a fuel cell.
Fuel
So it uses hydrogen to power the fuel cell. The fuel cell provides power at a constant rate. It has battery packs that actually modulate the power. So it has batteries and a fuel cell. And so that will take us out probably around to 2023, 2024.
So on the battery packs, have they figured out what to do when the battery meets an end of life? And have they figured out if there's a hazard, if the vehicle gets in an accident and it bursts into flames?
Yes, to both of those. Okay, so the battery packs are designed in such a way that they are very well protected from puncture. And there's a lot of elaborate systems that are built into those packs to disconnect cells and reduce the opportunity for thermal runaway that you can have with lithium ion. And there's Okay. So,
The thermal runaway is like the vapes and the phones that you see that people had in their pockets. It was one recently on the bus. It got too hot and his pocket was on fire. That's thermal runaway. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happens with vapes.
it,
And part of the reason I'm asking, I'm in the solid waste industry,
Mm-hmm.
and lithium batteries are our nightmare.
yeah, yeah. The secondary use that is being looked at really seriously right now with batteries out of vehicles is actually for energy storage for existing buildings. Because when these battery packs get to a point where they don't have enough storage capacity left to be useful in a vehicle, they still have a lot of storage capacity left where they could be useful in a building. Now, that doesn't solve the ultimate problem of what are you going to do with them when they're through at the building, but it does extend the life for them and give more opportunities for a secondary life. And yes, it is. I'm not sure if it's happening anywhere around here. I know that General Motors has done a lot of that with used battery packs from their electric cars as they've gone through their testing. I know BYD with their electric transit buses, that it's the same battery technology that they use in their energy storage. And so, yeah, it's being done. And it's being looked at a much higher level all over the world right now because of the need to deploy more solar. So that's actually a pretty good segue into technology infrastructure, because all of this new technology needs new infrastructure. We don't have enough of it. We have over 20 natural gas fueling stations, public access natural gas fueling stations in the valley right now, spread all the way from Stockton to Bakersfield, but we need more, especially if we're going to deploy the numbers of ultra-low NOx natural gas trucks that the district basically has identified that is needed to be done to comply with their SIP, which is something on the order of like 76,000 trucks. It's a huge number. And then as far as EVs going, we have EV charging for cars, and that's expanding, and that's going along pretty nicely. But we currently don't have any public use truck charging at all. And none of these trucks that are being deployed right now are really even considering public use charging as a method for keeping them going. All of the projects that we're working on right now are all return to base, where the trucks leave from a central yard, they go out to do their work, and then they come back. And to answer your question on range, this truck here for the Postal Service, these are actually running around in Fresno right now. There's about 10 of them deployed over at the main post office on E Street. They get about 70 to 75 miles on a charge, which works for this particular application. But for many, many other applications, that's just not enough. And the technology just isn't quite there yet to get them much more than that.
It's great to see these vehicles being deployed, but what part of town are they mostly deployed in?
Well, oh my gosh. Ooh. Okay. These vehicles go all over the city. So the Postal Service uses these to take packages and mail from the main post office in downtown Fresno on E Street and go out to the satellite post offices, wherever those may be. They also go to some of the larger mail generating sites, like the Valley Air District. Valley Air District has a truck like this that actually comes into their facility and picks up mail. So they're pretty much traveling all over the city.
So is there any way to encourage the United Postal Service to deploy it's late, more of these vehicles in the area of impact?
Not with this project, because these vehicles replaced all of their existing diesel or gasoline powered trucks of this class here in Fresno. And by doing so, we didn't retain any diesel or gasoline vehicles to be used in other parts. Well, these are a 2-ton delivery truck. This is bigger than the trucks the little ones that come around and deliver to your mailbox. This is the size up from that. So in this project, the answer would be no.
So are there any plans to get the next vehicles that are smaller that actually go into the neighborhoods?
Yes.
And transfer them over?
Yes, the
And what
Postal
is-
Service is actually working on a plan to electrify all of those delivery trucks that come to your house.
And do you know the timeline for that?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We learned about this because of our relationship working with the Postal Service's offices in Washington, D.C. But this is being handled at the federal level. It's not something that's being done here just in California.
Because, it would be really, really interesting to see what their local timeline would be on implementation of the transfer over
Yeah.
to cleaner technology.
They're a big organization that is a huge bureaucracy. And I can tell you that just in the conversations we've had with their people in Washington, D.C., just figuring out the manufacturer of the truck that they want has taken them years. And even getting to the specs of what this truck will do. And so, I don't know. We've kind of asked them, but they haven't been able to tell us. So, we just keep asking, and maybe they'll tell us one of these days. This particular project, though, was a good example of what it takes to deploy a relatively large number, 10 of these trucks, at the main post office in Fresno on E Street. And all of this, you can see, there was a huge amount of trenching necessary. There was a lot of additional power that had to be found in this main facility, and it almost wasn't there. There almost wasn't enough power coming into the building, into the main post office, to supply electricity for 10 of these trucks. And it took a lot of creativity and a lot of money to figure out how we were actually going to do that. And it took upgrades of the main panels, it took new transformers, it took all of this trenching out across their parking lot. We had to put plates across there because the trucks kept coming and you had an open trench. It was a big, big deal. And this is just one example of when you start talking about deploying large numbers of electric vehicles anywhere, especially trucks, what you're going to run into. The Frito-Lay project in Modesto is absolutely massive. It is huge. It is a $15 million project just with CARB funding. I'm sorry?
How much was the cost of developing the fueling station?
It added to the whole project was about $7 million, and this added a couple of $100,000 to the project that actually wasn't even budgeted. So we had to creatively come up with a way to find $200,000 out of the project funds.
Joseph, this is a great example of some challenges. I wanted to ask also, as you were upgrading the electrical infrastructure, did you have to do anything for resiliency in the event of, say, like PG&E power outage? Does this involve a backup generator with more traditional fuel, just in the event of that?
Yeah, great question, Scott. No, this project does not involve any resiliency factors. The Postal Service now is going, probably should have. But yeah, the PSPSs are becoming a real challenge. In our work with the transit agencies up and down the valley, they are very nervous because transit agencies are first responders, and in case of a disaster, the transit agency has to make rollout. But if the power's shut down and you're all on electric buses, you might have a little bit of a problem with that unless you have some way to charge them that's off-grid. And so we're working with them to come up with off-grid charging solutions or resiliency solutions, which most likely will include energy storage and solar on the facilities. And it's just that's what it's going to take. So this project, this added a lot of the work that this project and the other project that we're doing with the AmeriPride Linen Delivery Service in Southwest Fresno. that the electric upgrades added about a year's worth of time just to get this equipment designed and permitted and installed. And that actually was fairly quick compared to some stories that we've heard. So electric really requires a lot of planning. You have to think and analyze, does the facility have enough power capacity coming into it? And not only does the facility have enough power capacity, does the electric utility have enough power capacity anywhere near coming into that facility? Because what can happen if you put a lot of electric vehicles on a circuit, you can overload that circuit and the electric utility actually has to go in and upgrade a substation. So it becomes a really important planning exercise to go in early on as you're developing these projects and look at the site, look at the infrastructure, work with the electric utility and figure out, is this even going to work without a lot of upgrades? And then properly factor in the cost for those upgrades. And as I said down there at the bottom, the timeline for deployment, it could require over 4 years for a large-scale project, just from the start of the project all the way through to completion. This is a chart that we got from Black & Veatch, who is one of the premier engineering firms in the world, actually. They do all of the Tesla supercharge stations. They're the ones that engineer those and put them in all over the country and all over the planet. They also do an awful lot of work with electric utilities on and infrastructure planning and building and upgrading the electric infrastructure for the utilities to provide power. And this chart really kind of shows what you can get into if you find yourself in a case where you have to get electric utility upgrades. It can be 24 months or longer before you get out to this point where you're actually starting construction. So again, there's a lot of planning that's involved as you consider electric propulsion. And ultimately, we kind of think that a lot of our communities are going to kind of start looking something like this, where you have, on-site power that's generated from solar or wind, and you're going to have energy storage, and you're going to have a very sophisticated management system, and all of this is going to work both ways. So there'll be power that'll go into facilities and power that'll come back out of facilities to help the grid, and it's going to be a very, very different world when we start to really get to large-scale electrification. And with that, I'll open it up if anybody's got any questions.
We'll do a quick comment, and then we're running up on time, and I'm going to switch to the set.
We're going to need your help because one of the things that we have run into is that Fresno Unified gets scared by the three slides ago. So when we talked to Fresno Unified about electric school buses, some of the things that Joseph said, like this, they're like, what are we going to power? Bus barn, plugging them in. Mm-hmm. No, it's very difficult to talk to them about it because of the needs that are being outlined right here. The charging, the bus barn not having enough, the electricity coming to them. So we're going to not accept no, but we're going to need your help.
Yeah, and it's not just schools. The transit agencies. We've had this conversation with Fresno Area Express. The facility that Fresno Area Express operates is, even though it's got solar, it really doesn't have adequate power available for a full electrification of 110 buses, and all of them charging at a very narrow window of time so that they can make rollout. So this is definitely an ongoing problem. Yes, sir.
Well, is that the problem with Fowler, with their bus? Are they not able to run it, on adequately, as far as because they're not able to charge the bus adequately? Because I heard that they were only able to use it on a limited basis. I don't know if it's true or not.
Well, some of the issues may be charging. I know we work very closely with Fresno County Rural Transit. They're doing a lot of electrification of their bus fleet. They've got about 8 buses right now in service, operating in the rural communities, both on intercity and intra-city operations. they've definitely run into some challenges with charging.
Okay, we're going to do.
Well, there's hydrogen fuel cell buses have been out now for quite some time. Various transit agencies, Sunline Transit in Palm Springs runs hydrogen fuel cells and has for many years. They work. They're getting much better. My understanding is that Golden Empire Transit in Bakersfield has ordered 2 hydrogen fuel cell new transit buses. Fuel cells have gotten better to the point where they've become economical now. And so then it just becomes a case of, can we get the hydrogen at a cost that is comparable or, within their ability to pay for it. Hydrogen is pretty expensive right now, but I know CARB and the California Energy Commission have been working really hard to get more hydrogen fueling infrastructure in the state. And once we get more infrastructure and get more vehicles using it, it's kind of like supply and demand. Then the demand will be higher, and then hopefully the supply will come up to match it. It reduces them. But you still need electricity to run the reformer or the hydrolysis unit that's going to produce the hydrogen. I think Scott's point about the PSPSs, it's a reality that California is going to have to deal with now, and it's going to be something where we're really going to have to think very carefully about how we not only electrify, but you need electricity to run natural gas compressors or run diesel fuel pumps too. And so our communities are going to have to think more on a resiliency basis, and that's going to be our future. Well, you can, but most of the hydrogen produced today is done by steam reforming, where it doesn't need as much power as you do with hydrolysis.
Okay.
Yeah, the electrolyzer would be the ideal way, because then you're just taking it from water.
Bill, I'm going to cut you off, although I'm learning a lot and loving this conversation. I'm going to go to Ed and then Lisa, and then I want to make sure we move on so we have enough time to cover the supplemental environmental projects. But thank you so much, Joseph. You're not done yet.
I
but
know.
We can also, I think you're available after the meeting.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe we can continue this then.
Joseph, one of the keys that you've spoken with about was power storage.
Mm-hmm.
What is, I'm not familiar currently with the ability to store power well. I know that I've spoken with TID, MID.
Mm-hmm.
Their issues are timing for charging.
Right.
For that whole system.
Storage eliminates that.
Pardon me?
Storage pretty much eliminates that timing issue.
Do they have that technology currently?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So basically, storage is nothing more than batteries, just a bunch of batteries, okay? There's a project that I was familiar with when I was the sustainability manager for Fresno, the Santa Rita Jail up in Dublin. It actually can be islanded. It can go completely off-grid. It's got solar, it's got 4 megawatts of battery storage on site. So it can use its solar, its wind, its fuel cell, its diesel backup generator set, all of that. And in a matter of less than a millisecond, it can switch between the grid and its own internal power. So the lights don't even flicker and the computer doesn't even blink. And this thing is doing, and this was a project that was done 8 years ago. So more and more of this technology is coming onto play, and it looks like this. This is basically a microgrid. So you can turn a community, a neighborhood, or a facility into its own power supply. The technology exists today. It's expensive, but it can be done.
I appreciate that last comment real quickly. Our company experienced a tremendous amount of outages in the northern part of California during the fires and all of that. And until you've actually had to live through an outage and recognize all the services that no longer exist,
Yep.
it is terrifying is a good term. So
Yep, definitely.
I understand your concerns.
When we ask these organizations to, like the school district, to give them a bus that's alternative fuel and to start with the structure, we also need to have a grant program that offsets the construction of the charging stations. Because, you know, the small city of Fowler, yeah, they may get a bus, but do they really have the money to establish a charging station? And what does that, you know, imply? Because they're going to need basically a lot of hand-holding in these smaller communities to actually achieve the bigger goal here.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering, oh, she left the room. I start talking about the state and money and implementation, and they leave.
No, well, fortunately, there's actually some good incentive programs like
I'm
the
sorry,
Valley.
I can't hear you.
I said, fortunately, there's some good incentive programs for charging infrastructure. The Air District has a good program, and there's some new programs that they're working on that they'll be releasing not too distant. And these projects that we are talking about, that I was talking about, that CARB funded, infrastructure was part of it. So it has to be a holistic approach. It just requires good upfront planning.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph. Okay, I know this is really interesting. I just want to make sure that we honor the fact that we also have CARB here to do a presentation at the request of the comments we had last month. Yes, round of applause. Thank you. Supplemental environmental projects. Ready? We're going to go fast.
Oh, I do have to pull it up. Okay. You go. We'll get it. All right. So my name is Natalie Spiegel. I'm in the enforcement team at CARB, and I'm going to be presenting on supplemental environmental projects. Good news is my presentation isn't the full 30 minutes, so there'll be some time at the end for questions or comments, or I'll be here after if you prefer to talk with me one-on-one instead of in front of the whole group. Oh, here we go. So as part of our settlement process for a violation of one of our regulations, the violator is presented with the opportunity to fund a supplemental environmental project, or a SEP, which is what I'll call it for the rest of the presentation, as part of their penalty. So this slide kind of gives an overview of the definition of what a SEP is, but to kind of just run through it generally, it's a project that's not otherwise required by law, that furthers CARB's mission and positively impacts air quality. So a SEP is generally expected to do one of these four things. So improve public health, reduce pollution, increase environmental compliance, and raise public awareness through education. They're a really important feature of our enforcement settlements because they have they make an improvement in kind of the area where the violation is occurring. So how do you get your SEP eligible for funding? I think the first thing to keep in mind is the project has to fall into one of these 6 predefined categories. And I'll give an example, or more specific examples later on in the presentation about some actual SEPs. But to just kind of run quickly through these categories and maybe an example of what could fit into these categories. The first one is pollution prevention or reduction. So these are projects that prevent or reduce air pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. So something like installation of air filtration devices could fit in this category. The second category is environmental restoration and protection. So these are projects that improve or restore the quality of the environment. So this could look like planting trees in the area where the violation has occurred. The third category is environmental education or compliance training. So this would provide assistance to educators, schools, and community groups to conduct trainings and other kind of public awareness campaigns. The fourth category, community monitoring. These would be projects that provide tools such as surveillance or other monitoring equipment to train members of the public to be able to gather their own air pollution data and enhance existing air pollution monitoring networks. The fifth category is transboundary. So these projects would provide a direct benefit to Californians who live kind of in and around the border states and also along the US-Mexico border. And then the final category is other projects, and these are projects that don't necessarily fit into one of these 5 predefined categories, but they are considered on a case-by-case basis, looking at whether they comply with our SET policy and further CARB's mission. And I do just want to note that a project can fall into more than one of these categories, but it has to fall into at least one of these categories to be eligible for funding. So in addition to falling into one of the categories that I just mentioned, a project would also have to comply with these criteria in order to be eligible for funding. So the first two criteria, they really get at CARB's mission of reducing air pollution or exposure to air pollution, and also improving the environment. The third criteria is that the project has to relate to the violation, and the project can't benefit the violator, since it is a penalty for an air pollution violation. The fourth category is it has to go above and beyond federal, state, and local regulatory requirements. This means that mostly that the project has to be a voluntary project, and it can't be a project that's already required by the law. And then the last category is that the project has to be technically, economically, and legally feasible. And this mostly means that the project has to be able to be completed in the time frame proposed with the cost proposed for the project. So this is a map, and it's maybe a little bit hard to see on the slides, but I'm hoping that you guys have the PowerPoint in front of you that shows SEPs that have been funded since 2017. And this should just kind of show the distribution of where funding has occurred across the state. So as I already mentioned, I've kind of highlighted a couple examples of different SEPs that have been funded in California. One specific one that I wanted to bring up, and I think the folks from California, the Central California Asthma Collaborative, have left early, but I do want to highlight one of the SEPs that they've done. So they did a SEP called Healthy Air Neighborhoods Fresno. So they used SEP funds to deliver outreach material to community members about the district's residential wood burning rule. So as part of their project, they included a survey about community members' awareness of the regulations. They said that they have actually canvassed to almost 1,500 homes in the area and handed out brochures related to the air district's no burn, burn cleaner, and other residential incentive programs. Just to highlight, one of the local groups here. One other SEP that I wanted to highlight today, and I think it was briefly mentioned, or with IQ Air earlier, was air filtration systems in schools. So there have been multiple SEPs that have provided funding for the installation and maintenance of these air filtration systems in schools. So both districts and community groups have partnered with, in this case, IQ Air, but contracting company to actually install the air filters. And they're working with the local communities and school districts to mitigate the impacts of air pollution. This project highlights schools, but if you're thinking about SEPs, you could also think about air filtration in senior centers, community spaces, or kind of other spaces like that. Yeah. Let's see. So you have a project idea in mind, but how do you actually apply for funding? So we actually have two different ways that you can apply for funding. The first is through the Cali, PA online form, which is available at this link. There's also some flyers that I should have mentioned in the beginning that are on your tables that should have some of the links to where you can apply. Yeah. But yeah, excuse me. The other way is you can email the SEP email address directly, and we have a CARB-specific template. They both will ask for the same general categories, which I'll go over in a minute. I just wanted to highlight that numerous organizations or types of organizations have been able to apply to SEP funds. So nonprofits, community-based organizations, local, regional governments, tribal governments, businesses, even a violator could potentially propose a SEP. So the general categories, so either if you go through the Cali PA site or if you go through us directly, it'll ask for some of these general categories. And they mostly are who you are, your contact information, who your organization is, what you're actually proposing in the project, and what environmental benefits you're hoping to achieve as part of your project, your estimated timeline, cost, and some of those more specific logistics about the project itself. And then once we receive the proposal, either through the Cali PA's system, they'll send us all of their air-related proposals, or directly to us. We'll make sure it complies with our SEP policy, which is the categories and criteria that I was mentioning earlier. And if it doesn't, we'll work with you to see kind of what we're missing or what we can kind of work on for next steps to try to get your project eligible for funding. So once your project is listed, this is kind of a chart that shows the next steps in the process. So during the settlement process, our case investigator would present the list of eligible SEPs to a violator for funding. Once the violator picks the SEP or SEPs, depending on how much the penalty is for, the case investigator would prepare and send the violator a settlement agreement, and at the same time, we would prepare and send the SEP recipient an oversight agreement. And the SEP recipient is the person whose contact information appears on the form, and they're the person who is planning on managing the project. So this oversight agreement includes the specifics of the project, budget, timeline, cost, kind of some of the reporting requirements or the specific additional provisions that are part of that project. So after the case investigator, after the violator has signed the settlement agreement and the recipient has signed the oversight agreement, those documents would come back to us for our signature. And after all of the signatures have happened, the SEP funds can be distributed to the recipient. So depending on how much the penalty is for, a SEP can be fully funded, partially funded, or multiple SEPs could be potentially funded. So I just wanted to make a note of this in this slide that if your project is selected for full funding, it would be taken off of our eligibility list. If it's selected for partial funding, your project would stay on that list, so a potential future violator would have the option of picking your project to continue funding that project. So as I really briefly mentioned in the oversight agreement, there are specific reporting requirements if your project is selected. If your project is selected, we have a really detailed document that we can work with you and make sure you know. But as you're kind of thinking of next steps, just wanted to highlight and make this aware that there's quarterly and final reporting requirements. And these are mostly so just to confirm that you're doing what you said you would do with the funds, for the most part. And the details are also available on our website if you're interested in more of the specifics on that. So yeah, my name is Natalie Spiegel, as one of the contacts, and Warren Hawkins, also the manager of the program, is here. Happy to answer any questions you guys have or follow up on it. Oh.
Sorry. We're going to pause and actually have one more addition, and then we'll do Q&A right after. Sorry. Yeah.
So that was not included in the agenda, but we know that the Air District has its own SEP kind of project. It's called differently. That's why we had asked them to also share that information. Once Ryan finishes his presentation, then we will open up for questions.
Thank you so much. I can use 2 microphones. Hopefully I can talk loud enough with one that I don't need the second one. Hello, I'm Ryan Hayashi. I'm the Director of Compliance at the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, and I'm going to do a quick rundown of the district's alternative settlement program. So under the California Health and Safety Code, when the district issues violations, we have a procedure in which we assess penalties for the violations. One of the requirements in the California Health and Safety Code is that we have a process in which a violator can look to put money towards an alternative settlement in lieu of paying a portion of a penalty. So there's a kind of a difference in what the district can do versus what a supplemental environmental project is. The language in the California Health and Safety Code requires that an alternative settlement has to take action to improve air quality in lieu of paying that penalty. And I think they're under the Public Resource Code, which requires supplemental environmental projects. It's a little more, it described a little bit more openly, which has the possibility of putting money towards project maybe that we couldn't under an alternative settlement. One of the key things with alternative settlements that we look at is that there has to be a nexus between where the violation occurs, the type of emissions that are occurring, as well as the nature of the violation. For example, if there was a violation, an air pollution violation in Kern County, we wouldn't look to do an alternative settlement for a water project in Stockton or San Joaquin County. We would look for something in Kern related to air pollution, preferably the same type of pollutant. When we do alternative settlements, these are not, under the law, these are voluntary for the companies that are alleged to have violated our district rules or regulations. There's no ability for the district to mandate or force them to do that. Hopefully, when companies violate and they see the opportunity to put money towards improving air quality in these areas, they would see that as a benefit.
Excuse me. Isn't it true that there has to be not only a nexus, but if the business doesn't achieve what the SEP or the alternative plan for the community, that they face increased enforcement? Is that not true?
Yeah, I mean, basically what would happen if we didn't get the emission reductions that we were expecting as a result of that, then yeah, we would expect to get the penalty money back.
For that. Yeah. Okay.
So yes, there has to be that quantifiable emission reduction as a result of that alternative settlement.
Earlier on, there was some questions about enforcement and how valuable it was in air pollution issues. And there's significant risk for a company that doesn't perform once they've gone into a SEP or an alternative program that will substantially increase their fine.
Yeah, potentially, definitely. Similar to SEPs, any alternative settlements can't be fulfill a statutory requirement. I mean, we can't fund something when it's going to be required by a rule or regulation, and those are, because we would assume that those emission reductions are achieved through the statutory requirements. Typically, when we do the alternative settlements, it would be a situation where a singular violation would cover the entirety of an alternative settlement. So, we don't take smaller penalties and then apply it to a larger one. It's usually done in the context it's been a larger violation, more emissions. In those types of situations, we have a project maybe that could be funded by that. That's where we would look to do that. So in a nutshell, I mean, that's basically so our mutual settlement process in which we settle these violations is when they're typically, confidential processes where we're working with the violators. In those situations that they would say we're interested in doing an alternative settlement, in those situations we would look to pair them up with a community organization or someone of that nature that has a project, and let them work to put together the project, and then they would bring it to us. We would look at it, see if it meets the criteria that are established in the state law, and then in which case we would look to move forward with that alternative settlement. So that's, in a nutshell, the district's alternative settlement program. And
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Natalie.
Real quick, one thing. I mean, if there's suggestions that the committee has for us on our alternative settlement program, please let us know. We'd be very interested in hearing about it. And I think at this point, we're going to open it up for questions and comments for both Natalie and I.
Going to go to Laura.
Could individuals get this grant and not just nonprofit organizations? Or is it only for nonprofit organizations that receive the SEP money? Or could individuals? And the second question, I had an idea if there's a high emission of some kind of gas over like a trucking company, could one of the projects be to measure every truck to see which ones are leaking? With like for VOC, measure for VOCs or for hydrofluorocarbons if you detect a high amount in that area when you're.
So, I mean, for the alternative settlements, I mean, we don't limit it. I mean, if someone has a project, it's not limited just to community organizations. I mean, if it's a project that meets the criteria, then we could look to possibly do it as an alternative settlement. And I'll let Natalie respond as far as the steps.
Yeah, so I'm not sure an individual on their own can request a project, but like a nonprofit, businesses, local governments, tribal governments can all propose types of projects. And specifically on your project, we could work with you to make sure that it matches and fits into the a category and the criteria that we had that I outlined a little bit earlier. But
I'm gonna go Ivanka and then back.
I know earlier on in some of our discussions, we as a committee had asked that the alternative settlements be, if there's a violation within 617, then that violation funding would then stay within the 617 boundary.
Yeah, and we can take that into consideration. The reason why this isn't a measure within the AB 617 is because we don't have a specific mutual settlement program or process specific for AB 617. We have an overall program. So if we were going to make any adjustments to it, we would look to then do it valley-wide. And so that would be a larger discussion, which we're open to doing. I mean, like anything, we're always open to discussion and looking for improvements and enhancements to our program and processes. But if that was done, it would be done in a larger forum, and we'd look to get stakeholders from throughout the district's boundaries to participate in that discussion. And then we would definitely make the community steering committees aware that these discussions were happening and afford them the opportunity to also provide input into that process.
Just to echo Ivanka's comment, that was one of the proposed strategies in one of the initial drafts that was submitted to the Air District, that we didn't know at that time that you guys have this alternative settlement program. So we were asking to have some sort of similar SEP program for the Air District. I think that it would be really good to take several of the examples of the way they do it. For example, not only waiting for a violator to say, hey, well, I want to do this, and then you try to match it with a particular organization. You could have already in the pipeline a list of previously approved projects that meet certain criteria that you guys determine. I think that having a review committee would be great, and we had also said that steering committee members from this body could also be part of that, especially for the steps that are going to be benefiting this community. So that was a long comment, but a question for both of you. What is the average amount of the settlements, or in your case, the violations that you give, that then that could guide, for example, especially for SEPs, what is the estimate amount of a budget that you are more likely to receive and get funding for, rather than do a like $5 million project?
That was a lot. And so I'll start off with the comments and the suggestions. And that's why I think we really enjoy coming to these meetings and listening to the feedback from the committee, because they have good ideas. And in looking at our alternative settlement program and looking for opportunities to maybe use it more and open it up more broadly, I think what you're talking about is a good idea. And that we're willing to listen to those suggestions. And so I think it probably will be something that we do look to do is open that up and have that broader discussion about ways that we can improve and encourage alternative settlements to be more widely used. As far as dollar amounts, it varies drastically based on the programs or projects that are coming in. Like typically what I said, historically these are large dollar, over $100,000 type projects where we've done these.
And I would echo the same as Ryan. Our settlements, we encompass over 50 enforcement programs at the Air Resources Board. So settlements can range from a couple $100,000 all the way up to multi-millions of dollars. So for instance, Porsche recently funded over $2 million worth of air school filtration projects based on the settlement amount, but then we also have cases that settle for $120,000, so the violator may contribute $60,000 towards a SEP. Like Fresno Trees, for instance, where they can take little chunks of money over a period of time. So it's all over the map.
Okay, I saw Lisa and then Ed.
Here's what I want to see. Very plain and simple. Fresno has one of the worst air qualities. I don't know if we're above or below Bakersfield, But if you have these perpetrators that violate and they get fined, the money needs to stay in the Fresno area within the affected area. Because if not, we can see an economic drain and still people continue to be poisoned with bad air on the west side. So, that's what I want to see. The same in Shafter. If you have a violator in Shafter, the money, the fine, whatever you get from them should stay in that community to make it better, because that's the only way things are going to get corrected and the air quality is going to be better. Because if you give it to the county, they can go spend it someplace else, and what happens? The air continues to be bad. Makes very simple sense. I mean, no brainer.
I just have a hypothetical question. What if you had a violator in an area with higher quality air? Would you redirect that money into an area with lower quality air, or would you always keep it in the same community? Just to continue the hypothetical.
No, as I mentioned, I mean, the first thing we do is we look at where under an alternative settlement program, no matter where it would, we first look in that location where that occurred and look to find projects in that area.
Yeah, because you have some very big violators in this big red zone. I don't see, and if it happens someplace else and they're not in the red zone, guess what? It's a free-for-all on that money. But, red zone area needs to keep their fines and their money to make the community healthier, because, people are dying. Kids are, having asthma. Look at the air quality that we've had this week.
Yeah. Thank you for your comment, Lisa.
I want to echo what Lisa said. I agree with that comment, but having actually experienced a SEP with another company that I've worked for in the past, I will make this statement that the SEP is very specific. It's a demand the business has to accomplish, and after looking at the SEP that the district provided for us, we saw, and business has to see this every day. It's a matter of risk. How much risk could you take? And this particular SEP said in 18 months, this grass has to grow back, and if it doesn't, then you'll be fined further. And we chose to pay the fine and walk away. Much cleaner and certainly far less risk. And unfortunate, because I don't think that there was a good balance. I think SEPs have really good value to the community, but sometimes, how do I want to put it, overzealousness kills the cow. So,
thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, any final questions or comments for Ryan or Natalie?
I saw that you have flyers in Spanish. Can SEPs be submitted in Spanish?
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Not seeing any more questions, I'm going to move to sort of closing statements. I'm going to have Naomi come up and do that as our community co-host this time.
So before we close the meeting, we just want to open it up for your feedback. So what process do you want us to follow so that you can be more, we all can participate more in this agenda? Sometimes we see the agenda, we get a notification that the agenda's out, and we're like, oh, it would have been good to, include so-and-so, or just like the example that happened today, right? I kind of suggested after the fact, when I saw the agenda, to add Ryan's explanation. So any thoughts of how we could be more involved or engaged as steering committee members, recommending some of the items that are included in the agendas? So we're happy the way it is?
This is an ongoing open solicitation for answers to this. So if you don't have anything now, but you have other ideas that come to you, please continue to reach out and let us know, because these meetings are only as great as we make them, and we can change them as we need to moving forward through implementation. So
the other thing that we will have to discuss, not made a decision tonight because a lot of our steering committee members are missing, but start thinking, how often do we want to meet? We have been meeting monthly. During the summer, I think it was, or it felt like weekly, or bi-weekly, I don't even know, but what is realistic? Especially after the SERP is approved in February, just to work on the implementation plan. Do we want to continue meeting monthly, or do we want to space our meetings even, every other month? Or so again, we don't have to respond this question tonight, but this is something that should be in our radar, that we will be making a decision in our probably next meeting in January, unless you have some thoughts right now, like Lisa.
Well, this is the third time I'm going to ask, but has the Air District gone through the list of people who are actually on this committee, the ones that haven't shown up, the ones that are MIA, and have you guys called them yet to find out why they're not showing up or replacement?
We have not called them yet. No.
It's time to wish them a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Lisa. To that point, I think that not only reaching out to them would be maybe the first step, but then we also as a team, as a steering committee, that was something that we didn't include in our charter. Like what kind of participation or what was our required participation before you are dropped from the steering committee. So that could be something else that we could discuss starting tonight or in our next meeting.
Thank you. One of the things that has concerned me is we have a Hmong community that's far underrepresented on this committee, and I really would like to see an outreach to that community. There are some people that have made a couple of meetings that have some connections there, but I'd really like to see that increased as we move forward.
That's a great comment. Definitely, we should make attempts to reach out to the Hmong community. Mm-hmm. Now, I have a clarifying question for Jamie or someone else from the Air District. There was no addition of more community members until we expanded the boundaries to Southwest Fresno. Since we are seeing all this, a lot of our community members are being not attending, or maybe for whatever reason, once we reach out to them and the desire or the availability to be part of this committee is no longer there, can the committee again see if we should reopen the membership again, even to include diverse cultural groups?
Yes, I definitely think we can look at that. The one thing that needs to continue to happen, and this is what is a challenge, is that you have to, have 50+1 residents. And, what happens is if we kick off a resident, we have to kick someone else off. So, and we don't want to do that without kind of getting some feedback from the group, because some of the people that come on a regular basis aren't residents, and we don't want to lose those folks that have been participating, if that makes sense.
Anyone has any thoughts about that? Like, it would be hard to kick out a resident. How do we how we determine the criteria? How many times being absent, it's, grounds to say someone is not participating, we need to ask you to leave, or how do we do it?
Before you get to that point, I think you need to call the original list of people and ask them, do you want to continue because you haven't been showing up, or do you want to give up your spot and we'll go out and advertise to that targeted community so we can backfill? Because, this is a community-oriented group, and, because I think if they're going to kick off anybody, I'm on the short list.
Nobody's on the short list. But I do see Jamie nodding, so I think that is something that we can look into doing.
So can we ask the staff of the Air District to follow up with the existing committee members to understand the reasons why they're not coming, and see if there are any that really decide that they are off?
Yes.
And then bring that information to our January meeting, so then the group can make a decision of how to move forward. And it would be good to have a list. Maybe the names, but most importantly, their class, category. Are they residents? Are there, business representatives? So that we can see how is our composition.
Great. Okay, before we adjourn, because I know it is definitely time, I want to ask, well, one, thank you so much for doing this, but I want to see if there is another, let's do a round of applause for Naomi. Thank
Aplausos.
you. Okay, can we get a volunteer from maybe industries this time? Because we've had 2 community advocates the last 2 meetings, and I'd love to get an industry
Guys, you?
community
We have a
co-host.
volunteer.
We have Ed. Okay,
Woo,
thank you,
Ed.
Ed. So Ed in January. January 8th is the next time that we are meeting, and we will see you then. If you have any questions or want to keep talking to any of our presenters today, please stick around. If you would like to take home food, please do so. Yes.
So we've had a little bit of a discussion. Did people like this food? Is this something you want on the rotation? Okay, okay. Because we've been told you guys have had enough taquitos, with the exception of Brian, to last you for the rest of your
Thai next time.
What, Thai?
Thai?
We would love Thai.
Okay.
I'm only half joking. If you have recommendations for good restaurants that you think can get help, that aren't on the other side of town, that especially if they're in this community, we would love to support them.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming tonight. We will see you in January.